While the OGL hasn't been a major focus of my channel over the past week and a half, 2 weeks since things have simmered down a little bit and the SRD 5.1 is out there in the wild now, Kyle Brink actually finally did an interview over on a YouTube channel. And I'm not going to dive into the whole video because it's worth watching. It's linked in this article at Polygon. But the reason I wanted to pull up the Polygon article to talk about it was because it's pretty succinct and it pulls the things from the video that I would have talked about anyway. So it's easier for me to just point to this and say, hey, the folks over here at Polygon did a great job. Charlie Hall is the writer on this. So shout out to them for being able to create something that says it better than I ever could. But essentially, Kyle Brink sat down and gave a very in depth and revealing interview about the chaos that happened around things. And it basically just shows a complete breakdown of communication between Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast, and also within Wizards of the Coast as well. And just, I think in my mind, it shows a complete failure in terms of management to communicate because there it looks like there was zero communication about any of the things that were taking place on social media. I think one of my favorite parts of this, as I get into it, and he'll talk about it in the interview, but there's a section of this where Kyle says that he didn't even have a clue that the original statement was going to go out on social media. Like he had no clue. And I'm sitting here trying to wrap my brain around how you can have any sort of management structure where people aren't aware of what's being published on the social media channels and representing the company in a public manner. Now, I know that sounds weird because people are immediately going to go to like, well, do you think the CEO of McDonald's actually pays attention to the things that are being published on social media channels for McDonald's? Probably not, but I feel like that's a much bigger corporate structure. Wizards of the Coast is a large company, but not that big of a company. But it also goes to show you that why is Kyle Brink, the executive producer of the game, involved in the social media at any point along the way? Because an executive producer's job is to produce the products. This is not a marketing individual. He's not a public relations correspondent for the company. He's the executive producer. Producers are supposed to produce. Where has the CEO been in all of this? Where is she at? Because that's ultimately the person who bears the responsibility for all of these communication snafus. And I don't see anything about that individual at all, nor do I see anyone who's actually here's the most important thing to me. Who's the social media lead? Like, where's the marketing lead in all of this? Where's the social media lead in all this? Where's the social media manager? Who are the writers? None of these people are mentioned and everything else. So it just goes to show you that there was a complete lack of communication between all of these parties. And I think that there's going to be continuing to be a lack of communication moving forward in the future unless they make a complete restructure of the company, because what I've been seeing coming out of D&D Beyond in the days since then is business as normal, which appears that no one, it's like it's whatever. Let's read through this and get some more insight into what's going on here. So essentially here, Kyle Brink sat down with a hour-long interview. In an hour-long interview, so it looks like Kyle Brink sat down. So essentially, Kyle Brink sat down on the Three Black Halflings channel on YouTube and gave an hour-long interview. And it says here that in Taken in Full, Brink's statements point to what appears to be an evolving relationship between Wizards and its corporate owner, toy and game giant Hasbro. Kyle Brink said that at least part of the drama surrounding the recent OGL fiasco came from a lack of respect given for the creative and community teams at Wizards of the Coast. Going forward, he says, more members of those teams will be involved in high level decisions and their voices will carry more weight. Again, actions speak louder than words, Mr. Brink. So I'd love to see that represented in your social media channels moving forward. It says here, I don't need to get into the OGL stuff because we already know everything about it. It says, following IO9's initial leak of the OGL draft language proposed on January 5th, neither Wizards nor Hasbro provided an immediate response. When one was delivered on January 13th, many saw it as a petulant half measure and little more. The unsigned statement, because remember, it was public, it just said D&D Beyond staff. Like there's no byline, who wrote it, who's the social media writer, who's the content creator, who's the writer behind that post. This is hilarious. Um, One of the things it said was a couple of last thoughts. Firstly, won't be able to lease the new OGL today because we need to make sure we get it right, but it's coming. Second, you're going to hear a lot of people say that they won and we lost because making your voices heard forces us to change our plans. Those people will only be half right. They may have won, but so did we. This is literally what the executive producer said. I honestly don't know who contributed to the unsigned statement before I started posting. The statement that came out, I read it around the same time you did. And the next statement that was made was a few days later, which he actually had signed off on. He says, I was not pleased with what we had posted. This is one of the things that inspired me to take a personal, to put myself into this by name and take ownership of this because well, that was not acceptable to me. That's not us. That's not who we should be. And I felt like this needed to be less of a committee thing and more of a D&D thing. It says here that the committee thing that Brink is referring to was described throughout the interview as a collection of management executives and legal counsel tasked with refining the next version of the OGL. And according to Brink, there were dissenting opinions in the room that came from the team at Wizards, but unfortunately, their protests were not taken into account by the larger group, meaning Hasbro. He takes personal responsibility for that oversight and said, I would say that the voices of our creative and community teams weren't loud enough in the room, and that's what's changing. We're giving much more of a voice to the folks on my team, myself included, who are closer to the community and would like to catch this kind of thing in the future and have enough volume to prevent it. He then went on to say that the authority being given to the Wizards staff is now flowing directly from Cynthia Williams, the president of Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming at Hasbro. She joined them from Microsoft in February 22, where she previously, we know who she is. This is what blows my mind to some degree, because again, in a big enough corporate structure, an executive producer probably doesn't need to be aware of what's being published on their social media channels. And here's the other thing too, in retrospect, is that the CEO doesn't necessarily need to be keeping a day-to-day tab on what's being published on social media. However, when a statement like what was made goes out and it's tone deaf and it creates ripples across an international community and you're being picked up by every single news outlet in the world, not just gaming news outlets, and you have this huge backlash against the D&D brand, the CEO should have stepped up immediately and taken charge of that situation. Not the executive producer, not Kyle Brink, the CEO should have come out and say, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened here. I'm digging into it. We're going to find out how that statement was written, because they still haven't ever said who signed it. It just says an unsigned statement. No one has taken credit for that original tone deaf response where they're like, you may have heard that they won, but we won too. It's like whoever wrote that needs to be fired. Like that was a horrible statement, and no one has ever taken credit for that or been exposed as the person who is going to be punished for that. But the CEO should have stepped up, not Kyle Brink. So in the scope of those people should have been aware after that had been posted that things were going south and that they immediately needed to take control of it. They didn't, and they let it go on for several more days before Kyle finally stepped in and made his statements. Now, since then, I will give credit where credit is due. Kyle Brink has made some public-facing statements, and he at least has put himself in the firing line by being willing to go out there and do this interview where he was exposed in a way that no one else on the Wizards of the Coast team has done so far, including the CEO, who remains shielded behind people like Kyle and does not appear to be taking responsibility for anything. However, he said, I would say greater respect is now being given to Wizards team. Being heard and being respected is important. And I will say to her credit, I know Cynthia has gotten a lot of negative opinions about her, but she listens and she does change based on information. And she's one of the most empathetic C-suite people I've ever worked with by a country mile. So I'm confident that when she says she's going to listen, she's going to listen. Again, who is Cynthia? Why have we not heard from her? Why isn't she out here doing interviews like Kyle and calming people down and helping to restore faith in the brand? That's what I would like to see. In any case, this interview paints an interesting picture of how there appears to have been a complete communication breakdown between Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast, with legal committees and other people controlling your social media and doing things above everyone else's heads and not telling people what's coming in the pipeline and just going off and posting something out there without informing your executive producer and other things, hey, this big thing is happening. We're going to make a statement on it. Instead, they just went and did it, and then it all backfired. Now, it may be a case where they didn't feel like they needed to make those qualifiers, and they didn't feel like they needed to go around and tell everybody this is what we're going to be posting because they didn't think they were going to get backlash. But when they did, it's now exposed a system that just needs a lot of reworking from the ground up. Now, I don't know how many people would work at Wizards of the Coast. I'm not going to go look that up. That's a internet sleuth thing that somebody else can do. But I did appreciate the interview for pointing out the apparent just I'd say it's one of the worst communication fiascos I've seen in recent years of just multiple corporate entities not communicating with each other, not having a clue what the other party's doing, and then even within Wizards of the Coast, Kyle talks a lot about how that's all changing. We're going to give more of a voice to folks on my team, myself included, who are closer to the community. We'll be able to catch this kind of thing in the future and have enough volume to prevent it, as opposed to the way it was done in the past, which apparently was people going over Kyle's head, people going over everybody else's heads, and the legal department out there making statements and doing other things. I don't know. I love the fact that we still don't have any clarification of who wrote that original statement, and I think that would be great if we could get that clarity at some point and find out what happened to that person. How were they reprimanded for their massive screw up with essentially ruining the Dungeons and Dragons brand, um, above and beyond the OGL fiasco? Tone deaf responses. Food for thought. Like, subscribe, hit the bell icon down below. If you want to support, you can. Super chat, super stickers, super thanks. Patreon page, Discord channel, memberships here on YouTube, all great ways. I'll see everybody in the next episode. Until then, stay safe and happy gaming, everybody.